important is it to talk about and document the sex lives of dictators and heads of state? Up until recently, this was merely an abstract question for me. If I was writing an article or a book and a particular affair became important to the story, I just include it like any other piece of a leader's biography. But I recently put out a book called The Vortex about one of the worst genocides ever to occur in the last 100 years. And along the way, I included the details of General Yahya Khan's sordid sex life and affairs, some of which may have fueled his lust for violence in the country that is now Bangladesh. But here's the thing. Now that the book is making its rounds in India, the most common response from a whole slate of esteemed Indian reviewers is that me and my co-author Jason Miklian are just juicing up the details to sell more books. They simply can't believe that a genocidal maniac who ordered the deaths of up to 3 million people, along with a systematic campaign to rape and impregnate as many Bengali women as possible, would also conduct his own affairs and drunken sexual exploits. Here is what the former ambassador of India to the EU, a guy named Chandrasekhar Das Gupta, wrote in the Business Standard. And to quote, "It is difficult to believe that even the priaptic Yahya Khan would ignore an appointment with the Shah of Iran in order to pursue his amorous interests. And would the visiting monarch actually pursue his host into the bedroom? Who recorded these precise state of play between the Pakistani dictator and mistress at that moment in history?" And then, okay, so that's one, and great use of the word priaptic. Kudos to you. But here's another review. This one came from Uday Bakshar in the Financial Express. Again, to quote, "This kind of salacious detour detracts from the credibility of the narrative and muddies the central theme of an epochal event, the liberation of Bangladesh in December 1971. Okay, so that's one. And now here's another one. This is from India Today, which is a really big deal in India. It's by T.C. Raghavan, who was once the Indian commissioner to Pakistan. Quote, "While such devices may make a rollicking yarn, they surely stretch credibility to maintain that Yahya finally signed off on the airstrikes against India and initiated the 1971 war out of frustration and anger because, according to the authors of The Vortex, that's me, he just confronted his son in flagrante delicto with a favorite mistress. Nevertheless, a thunderingly good read." Now, I certainly appreciate that all of those reviewers had great things to say about how great a read The Vortex is, but I also think it's important to set the record straight about whether or not my co-author and I are simply making things up for a more salacious story. In fact, before I dig in, I'd love to know from you down in the comments why these reviewers are so predisposed to think that heads of state would be above their own salacious and sexual activities. But here's my take. While I certainly admit that I know a good story when I hear one, I bristle at the thought that people think we're making up history. Because the truth is, more often than not, history is much, much stranger than fact. In truth, Yahya Khan's sexual exploits were so well known in Pakistan at the time that they were literally the talk of the nation. As we noted in our extensive citations, the former superintendent of police in Rawalpindi, a man named Mohammed Chowdhury, gave an interview that he witnessed the Shah of Iran banging on Yahya's door, but Yahya wouldn't open it because he was too busy getting a blowjob from a prostitute. That same superintendent noted that all the local police used to call the President House Pimp House. I'd also like to note that Chowdhury wasn't only looking to settle an old score with Yahya. His memoir aired out the dirty laundry of some half a dozen Pakistani leaders who ran roughshod through his jurisdiction over 2 decades. But he is far from the only source. Hakim Akhtar, also known as General Rani, was not only Yahya Khan's madame, but also controlled his social calendar. She gave an interview to Nightline in 1997, which outlined exactly what it took to be a madame to presidents and generals, and how her influence altered the trajectory of national politics. I'll put a link to that interview down below. Finally, in the climax of the book, we repeat a story about how Yahya Khan ordered the infamous airstrike against India that directly precipitated the 1971 war, only after he found out that his own son, Ali, was sleeping with his favorite mistress. The sort here is Diwan Birendranath's book, The Private Life of Yahya Khan, which, we admit in our notes, is slightly more problematic than those earlier sources because he was an Indian journalist who might have had an axe to grind because he lived through that war. That said, his book was based on real research with citations to dozens of Pakistani sources and wasn't just hearsay. He was a real journalist. And in his own notes, he said he was directly interviewing witnesses in Yahya Khan's police entourage who didn't have as much freedom to speak to the local press, but wouldn't face the same repercussions voicing their accounts in the Indian media. And it's also important to note that the book came out in 1974, and Yahya Khan had 6 full years to refute the claims, and he never did. Neither, as far as I'm aware, did Ali or his mistress, K.N. Hussain, nor, as far as we could ascertain, anyone in Pakistan at all. In short, no Pakistani at the time was surprised by the allegations. All of that said, of course, is that we have documented all of our decisions in the 50 pages of notes that we have in the back of the book. But there is a more important point that this brings up that we absolutely have to address. This is not just my desire to set the record straight, and I'm not just airing sour grapes at some negative comments in the reviews. This is the bigger point. Dictators and world leaders throughout history are making decisions at the same time that they navigate their own personal lives. And those leaders are often extremely compromised. Just like anyone who's ever had a crisis at home, personal drama can creep into the workspace. The problem is, when you're running a war, your personal crisis can endanger the planet. Outrageous personal stories are shocking, but they're not as shocking as what they did in the political sphere. Now, off the top of my head, in just American politics, we have JFK addicted to painkillers and carrying on affairs with many women, including Marilyn Monroe. Lyndon B. Johnson was known to expose himself in public. Nixon was an outrageous drunk. Bill Clinton got a blowjob in the Oval Office and testified in front of Congress about it. And most recently, Donald Trump has been accused of sexual assault by an astonishing 26 women. We can also cherry pick from a few leaders outside of America too. Adolf Hitler carried on an affair with the British socialite Unity Mitford until the outbreak of World War II, when he took up with the actress Eva Braun and later married her. Then, in Libya, Gaddafi had a harem as well as a whole troop of 6-foot-tall Amazonian bodyguards. And don't forget about Idi Amin in Uganda. He not only had a harem, but notoriously beat, raped, and tortured and killed a surprising number of them. So there's an old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And the theme I'm getting at here is that when someone rises to the top of a political structure, it's no surprise that their personal lives start to take on monstrous proportions as well. The real thing that's too insane to believe isn't that someone like Yahya Khan would have a mistress, but that someone willing to break laws, murder, to take power, would somehow be the moral paragon at the moment they got that power to not do these things. Yes, sometimes these details appear salacious on the page, but they are intensely human stories and had a direct impact on the politics of the moment. Indeed, no one should be surprised at all that Yahya Khan's libido led his actions as much as his brain. The truly terrifying thing is that there are a lot of leaders out there just like him. Ignoring these people's personal lives lets us ignore some of their real motivations at that time. And so this is my refutation to what is becoming a theme about the Vortex who think that we're just making things up. sometimes you got to believe the facts, and sometimes the facts are that world leaders who do systematic rape campaigns and kill lots of people are actually have their personal lives that reflect that as well. So, no offense to those reviewers. I mean, I get it. Like, I totally get why you would read that these leaders are bad, and then an author comes in and says, no, you're much worse than you even knew. It does seem almost too good to be true, but you should not just discount that out of hand without at least some evidence or reason to think that, other than it is just unseemly. Okay, well, thank you so much for listening to this video and letting me voice my concerns about this theme on the book The Vortex. If you get a chance to read it, I mean, honestly, it's one of my best books. It's super different than What Doesn't Kill Us and The Wedge, but it's really interesting, and it has to do with a war and a genocide and American involvement and things that you probably have never heard of. So, and go check that out. Please like and subscribe. Please get a conversation going about this, because I mean, I'm having a lot of fun with these YouTube videos, and just show me some appreciation and tell me that you like what I'm doing. All right, thanks.